Avichal here with us. First, let me briefly introduce Avichal. Avichal is a successful serial entrepreneur with executive experience at Google and Facebook, which acquired his previous company. Avichal is also the co-founder and general partner at Electric Capital, a fund particularly focused in cryptocurrencies, blockchain-based businesses, and fintech companies and marketplaces. Hi, Avichal. It's great to have you here.
Hey, Don. Thanks for having me.
Great. So let's get started. So Avichal, you have been in the blockchain space for quite a long time, and you have been really active in the space. I know you have a lot of really interesting opinions and deep thoughts in the space that actually the community in general has been very excited about. So when you think about where blockchain will be in 5 years, what trends in crypto now do you think will flourish?
Well, first, thanks for having me. It's good to see you. The way we think about blockchain and crypto is we come from an engineering background, and so kind of our lens on it has always been, what is this platform, or what are these platforms, and what are these technologies uniquely good at? And that's usually where adoption starts. And I think if you look at the underlying technology, I always find it useful to contrast it to the previous generation, because I think one of the mistakes that people make is they just see what was successful on the previous generation of platforms and then assume that those same things will be successful here. And I think we kind of saw that kind of in like 2016, 2017 with the first generation of crypto projects that were launched. A lot of it was like stuff that worked on the internet, but decentralized was kind of the pattern. But really, if you look at the tech, what you realize pretty quickly is that the platforms just make fundamentally different trade-offs. And so, on the internet, it was all about speed and scalability and throughput. And to get all of these things, we traded off our privacy. We gave up ownership of our data. We didn't have, seizure resistance. We sort of like gave up all these things to get all the properties that make like Facebook and Google kind of work. And what's fascinating about blockchain and crypto is we kind of turned that on its head. And so we said, we'll give up some speed and scalability and throughput, but in return, we get to control the data. We get to have data immutability. We get to have seizure resistance of assets. We get all these, we get privacy in a different way. And so we get all these unique properties. And so if you look at it through that lens, all of a sudden you say, well, where do these kinds of properties matter? And our opinion has always been that the place where these properties tend to really matter are where they will flourish, and specifically places where the internet did not do a good job of meeting people's needs. And so we've always said things like finance and things that deal with money would be a fascinating place. Games are always an early adoption use case of any new platform. Potentially healthcare, because things like privacy and data immutability really matter with healthcare. And what's fascinating is if you look at where did the internet really cause massive disruptions, the internet disrupted things like media. But if you look at the biggest companies in the world from 40 years ago, well, the finance companies and the healthcare companies are still kind of there. Whereas most of the other companies over the last 40 years have been, whether it's retail or media or whatever, have been disrupted by the internet. And so we think actually the combination of this being such a good fit for those industries, and so many of those industries being so backwards and old and resistant to technology, creates this really interesting intersection in this storm. And so we spend a lot of our time thinking about what are the building blocks in finance, in decentralized finance, in privacy preserving technologies that can be applied to things like healthcare that now are ready, and actually you can build solutions that are truly unique and different and new, and they might be really disruptive to the existing companies. So those are some of the areas that we focus on.
Great. Yeah, thanks. And for you, you've worked at startups and large enterprises in the past. So how do you foresee enterprises using blockchain technologies in the future? And what are the blockers for them to get to mass adoption?
Yeah, it's a good question. It kind of depends on how you define enterprises. I think, there's enterprises, which usually means big companies. And so there are enterprises today, and then there are the enterprises of tomorrow, which are startups today. And I think they'll use them in very different ways. So I think the companies that are enterprises today will generally look at it through the lens of how do we do the things that we do today, but more efficiently. And so how do we take the business that we have and make it 2%, 5%, 10%, 20% more efficient? It's generally very hard for large and existing enterprises to do something dramatically different than what they do today. And in part, it's just the nature of how organizations are set up, right? There are goals and there are skills that people have, and there are things that people can measure inside a big company. And when you can measure them, then you want to improve them. And so what these large organizations will do is they'll try to improve the things that they can already measure, which ultimately means they'll try to make their existing businesses more efficient. I think that some of those will be interesting. I think some of those will have meaningful impact, whether it's in banks being able to move money across country boundaries more easily, or healthcare systems being able to share data, things like that. I think will have impact. But in a lot of ways, I think those might be incremental, in that they might give you 10 or 20 or 30% improvements on things. The really step function changes, I think, will come through the combination of new platforms and startups, because there's no baggage with startups. And so, it's a little reasoning by analogy is always a little bit tricky. But if you look at the history of the internet, for example, if you went back to the 90s, I think a lot of people said, oh, this is the information superhighway. And so obviously the big winners in this space are going to be CNN and the New York Times. That's really who benefits from the internet. And in retrospect, that just sounds silly, right? Like the big winners were YouTube and Facebook and Google and all of the native companies that were built around this new technology. Even in something like retail, it wasn't Walmart that really won big, it was Amazon. Because what Amazon did was they built their entire organization around the new technology and embracing the new technology. And so I think the really interesting stuff, the companies that are going to be worth $100 billion plus, or the networks that might be worth $1 trillion, are going to be brand new things. And they might look weird and different. If you look at all of the biggest companies on the internet, a lot of the things that they do are really weird. It's like you're going to, get into a stranger's car and go spend the week at a stranger's apartment, and none of these people are going to kill you. And by the way, while you're there, you're going to broadcast to 100 million strangers on the internet what your opinions are. A lot of this stuff is kind of bizarre, right? So it'll look weird initially, but I think a lot of startups will embrace this, and they'll do brand new things with it that will look weird and different. But those will end up being really big companies as well. And so actually a lot of the enterprise use cases will end up starting with startups, and then those startups will just happen to be the fastest growing businesses, and they'll end up becoming enterprises. And it's great because actually for those companies, the blockers are very few. They don't have large teams of people that need approval. But I think you'll see both. So I think you'll see some big companies embracing it, mostly for efficiency gains. And then the startups, I think, will embrace it truly natively to extract new value and build new things that the enterprises of today can't even imagine.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That's a great point. It's interesting that also for someone like me who actually have been doing both blockchain and also AI machine learning in the past, it's actually interesting to see that for AI machine learning, it seems that of course it can help both the startups and the big companies, but it seems that it's helping, at least so far, it's helping the big companies more. Whereas I think I very much agree with you. Blockchain is such a disruptive new technology that actually you need to essentially rethink both in terms of the business models and also the actual ecosystem and so on. So that actually startups may be the best place to grow the technology and really have fast growth and real impact.
Yeah, actually, the business model point I think is a really interesting one too. That's another place where with crypto networks and sort of the ability to have tokens, I think you change the kinds of businesses that can be started and who can make money in the value capture mechanisms. And so I think that also unlocks the potential for startups to have new monetization mechanisms, which then of course means you'll have new companies, which, I think you're right with AI, ML, a lot of it, you did get some new companies, but a lot of it benefited the incumbents. And I think in part it's because the alignment of business models. What's your sense? Is that you think that because you also have some experience on the AI ML side, and so in your experience, do you think this is fundamentally different? Do you think blockchain platforms are going to unlock more startups versus big companies than AI ML did? Or I'm kind of curious how you think about it.
Right. Yes, that's a very good question. I think for AI and machine learning, so first of all, really what it is, you need to have a huge amount of data. Of course, the big companies actually, going back to what we talked about earlier, like all these incumbents, as they have grown, bigger and bigger, like they actually, what they are doing, what their mode is actually the data. So for startups, it's actually very difficult to compete with the large companies because the large companies are the ones who have data. They have users' data, they have lots of data. And also then as you use this data, you improve the user experience of their user base and so on. So in general, I think that's one of the reasons I think so far we've seen that AI machine learning actually helps more on the incumbents than the startups.
I've heard you in the past talk about like the data economy and the responsible data economy in the context of Oasis. I'm kind of curious how you think about all of the data pieces with blockchain. Like, do you think that data model, the data monetization model that the internet companies have had for the last 20 years, do you think that changes with blockchain? Like, is that disruptive to that model at all?
Right. Yes, that's a good question. I think, so that's why, even going back to what you were saying earlier, so with the internet, of course, it has benefited everyone tremendously. But at the same time, right, it comes at some cost as well. So today, and also even with AI machine learning and with other digitization, data is a key driver of modern economy. But a lot of this data is also really sensitive, and how to really properly handle the sensitive data has really posed many challenges for both individuals and also for businesses. So for the individuals now, we are seeing that people are talking about users of other products because users actually users are losing control of their data. They don't really know what's happening to their data. And also a lot of their data is actually being sold without users' awareness, even though sometimes they are sold under the umbrella of anonymization, but we actually know that this anonymization really is not sufficient in protecting users' data privacy. And also users are not really getting sufficient direct benefits from their data because of the current power dynamics, users actually are not, there's no clear rights for users to their data, and the users don't have control of their data, and hence it's actually difficult for users to gain more fair value from their data. And also for businesses actually are suffering as well. So businesses also don't want to see that their users are losing trust from their service. And also a lot of businesses are still suffering from large-scale security data breaches. And also it's becoming more and more expensive and cumbersome for them to comply with the privacy regulations like GDPR and CCPA, and also more importantly, it's actually still very difficult for businesses to utilize data. There are a few like big incumbents that they have data, but actually for most businesses, they would like to utilize more data, but still a lot of data is being stored in data silos, so that because of privacy reasons and so on. So it's actually difficult for businesses in general to utilize data. And for example, for medical researchers, also it's difficult for them to get access to medical data to help them develop better cures for diseases and so on. So overall, we are seeing that the world definitely is growing in the direction of just getting bigger and bigger data economy. There has been statistics showing that the world has trillions of dollars in data economy already, and it's only growing exponentially, as in the foreseeable future. But a lot of this data economy has many, many challenges, and we think that essentially we actually need to build a new paradigm, which is a more responsible data economy that actually help address the challenges for both sides, to help users to better maintain control of their data and rights to data, and so that the data can be utilized in a privacy-preserving way, in a more responsible way, and also help users to gain more value from their data. And also, on the other hand, for businesses to provide the technologies and tools needed for the businesses to essentially be a more responsible player in the space as well, to better help users to maintain control of their rights, but still be able to benefit the businesses to utilize the data, but in a responsible way. So that's overall, we think that it's really important as the world moves into the future.
I'm curious, do you think it starts, I mean, I think the criticism I usually hear around a lot of this data stuff is that most users don't really care. And I'm kind of curious what you think about that. Like, do you think users actually care, or do enough users actually care? I mean, maybe a better way to ask that question is, do you think there are enough businesses that care that you can kind of get this data economy off the ground? Or do you think that there are actually like a small number of users who care a lot, and there's some like certain use cases that you can go after that where privacy really matters and data ownership really matters, and that is enough to get it off the ground? Like, where do you think all this stuff starts, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at VU, that's why I think privacy is not just about privacy, it's to protect user-sensitive information. I think it's more important to help users establish their rights to data and help users to maintain control of their data. And ultimately, what this will lead to a better power dynamics for the users. So users actually will be the one who actually has more power. And then with more power, this negotiation table, this will help users to gain more fair value from their data, and it generates more benefits for the users as well. So as one example, like today, for example, because users don't have control over their data, then once the user allows a third party to use their data, then users lose control of their data, and then the third party has a copy of the user's data. The third party can do whatever it wants to, right? For example, sell users' data and so on. But if, for example, in the Oasis platform, we provide a different solution where users can maintain control of their data, and when user can allow a third party to use users' data, but then this third party has to use users' data in this secure execution environment, so that the third party doesn't get a raw copy of users' data during the computation. So that even when the user is allowing the third party to use users' data, but the user still is able to maintain control of his or her data. And then in this case, the third party can, if the third party wants to use users' data again, it still needs to get users' consent and needs to, for example, offer proper rewards and so on. So in this case, users are actually in the driver's seat. So users actually can, again, it's important to have this, being able to maintain their rights to data. So also this is what we call like a data tokenization, where the Oasis platform essentially enables this concept of tokenizing the data that actually helps create a new type of assets that we call data assets. So now just like in the traditional setting, users have financial assets. Today, most users have financial assets. But having your cash balance or your stock or your house and so on, so other type of properties. But here, in the future, we can see that more and more parts of anybody's, including users, individuals, and businesses, their assets actually will be more and more in the digital form. Like data actually will become an increasingly more important and more valuable type of value for an individual or for a business. And hence, this notion of data asset, I think, is also a really important part, a really important notion going forward for users, for users or entities, essentially their value. And hence, with the Oasis platform, its unique capabilities, it's the first time to enable such establishments of data assets, and also being able to enforce the rights on the data assets, even when the data is being utilized. So we hope that this actually can really help change the dynamics and help enable this more responsible data economy. And I think
That's really cool.
this, right, I think people will care and right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so data tokenization, I think, is really interesting and cool. So how would that work exactly? So would I mean, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about it, but I think it might be something that others don't have as much familiarity with. So with data tokenization, is it all of my data is now tokenized and I can give it out piecemeal to different people? Or is it that there's like a basket of data that is packaged up somehow for different apps to use? Or how exactly does that work inside Oasis?
Right, that's a very good question. So there's a lot of flexibility to this. So first of all, in terms of the notion of data tokenization of this data assets, there's at least two parts to it. So one is on the blockchain, and the blockchain can help provide an immutable ledger of users' rights to data and also their policies of how they want their data to be utilized. So let me give you an example in actually a recent beta launch on the Oasis platform in the domain of genomic data. So Nebula Genomics is a genomic company that actually partnered with Oasis. They have launched their a new beta service on the Oasis platform to help users, and this will be the first time actually users become owners of their genomic data. And what happens is that this rights to the user's genomic data is locked on the blockchain, and also together with the policy of how the user wants this data to be utilized. For example, in this case, if the user wants to give consent to the genomic company to allow the genomic company to run genomic analysis on the user's data and provide the analysis results to the user, then so this will be reflected in the policy on the blockchain as well, and then the Oasis platform also provides this secure computing capability where now this genomic company can run the genomic analysis on users' data in this secure execution environment. So what this allows is, so first of all, because of the tight coupling and combination between the secure execution environments and this blockchain, this distributed ledger. So first of all, the computation can only be run once the secure execution environment checks according to the blockchain that this computation is allowed. And also once this computation is allowed, users' data, the genomic data now will be computed over in the secure execution environment. For example, doing the genomic analysis by the genomic company. But in this case, the secure execution environment protects the confidentiality of the user's data, such that the genomic company outside of the secure execution environment won't be able to access users' data. And hence, after the computation is over, if the genomic company wants to run the analysis again, it actually still needs to go through the user's permission and so on. So really, this is the first demonstration showing that how users can maintain control of their data and also at the same time still enable the data to be utilized, and in this case, utilized in a privacy-preserving way where their data is not being leaked and it's not being stolen and so on. So in this way, essentially it created this new type of assets, data assets, through this data tokenization, again, by actually combining the blockchain logging users' rights to data and their policies of how users want their data to be used, and coupled together with this enforcement mechanism, which is the secure execution environment. And also in this case, as users' data is being used, the usage of the data will also be logged in the blockchain. So the blockchain actually can maintain an immutable record of when the user's data has been used and who and how the user's data has been utilized.
Very interesting. It actually reminds me a little bit of like credit scores in traditional finance as well. It's just like this really valuable asset of everything you've done, and it gets passed around, and third parties make a lot of money off of it, but actually individuals don't. Do you think there are applications of this to finance and DeFi as well? So this idea of data tokenization?
Right. That's a great question. So this is an area that certainly we have been exploring as well. So far I've talked about data tokenization and data assets in essentially medical data. So for example, your genomic data, and of course can extend to other types of healthcare and medical data as well. And another really important domain is the financial domain. Again, users has a lot of data, their purchase history, their bank account information, all that. So there's a lot of valuable financial data and information for users as well. And again, so far, actually, a lot of that data actually has been sold without users' knowledge oftentimes for other parties to gain benefits and advantage and so on, without users actually getting the proper benefits. And using this type of Oasis type of technology, it actually can help users to better maintain control of their financial data as well. So just like what you just mentioned, so in this case, instead of the genomic data, we can swap the genomic data with the user's financial data. So for example, the Oasis platform will actually have integration with certain financial APIs, like Plaid, which is very like a widely adopted financial APIs. So from that, actually, users can tokenize actually their financial data as well, and then this financial data can then actually be used for computing credit scores, risk scores for the user, and then from the scores, then users actually could potentially get better loans and also may get other better services as well. So as one example, actually on the Oasis platform, there are already third parties that is actually building services using capabilities like this for providing better mortgage interest to users and so on. So yes, it's another really exciting domain where, again, being able to maintain control of users' financial data and so on can really help users to gain more benefits.
Yeah, that's cool. Is the Plaid integration with like the mortgage interest rate calculation, all that stuff, is that already live? That's already working on Oasis?
So right now it's still in like POC stage. So with the genomic data, there's already a beta launch.
Wow.
But with the financial service, so it's in POC stage.
Wow, that's super cool. That's actually I didn't realize it was that far along. I know we talked about it sort of theoretically in the past, but that's super cool that it's being built already and being tested. That's cool. That's great. I don't know how you want to. This part hopefully we'll trim out. But how do you want to end it? We can keep talking. Are there other points that you wanted to hit? I wanted to make sure we got like the data tokenization and DeFi and all that stuff in. Are there other points that you wanted to hit?
Yes, this part. Oh, maybe we can just tie this a little bit more to DeFi, like in the sense
sure.
that right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Don, the idea of like bridging to credit scores in sort of traditional finance or legacy finance makes a lot of sense. Do you think there are tie-ins for like DeFi? I think that's sort of topic du jour these days with the Ethereum ecosystem. Do you think there are applications of this idea of data tokenization for DeFi as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if we look at DeFi today, DeFi of course has a lot of innovation and so on, but there are also many challenges and limitations. So for example, lending on DeFi today is only over collateralized. So essentially sometimes you have to have money in order to to borrow more money, which doesn't seem to right.
Yeah. It's not very in line with the ethos of where a lot of people are coming from, of like the whole idea was to invent a new system, and we created actually like we borrowed the worst parts of the old system, which is like the only the people who have a ton of money can make more money, which is kind of the opposite, I think, of what a lot of people want to do with this.
Right. Exactly. So if you look at in the traditional finance, under-collateralization is actually a really important part, and it's sometimes even more important than this over-collateralization. But when you do that, then really you need to know more about the borrower. You need to know, right, the credit score, the risk scores, and so on. So this is one example of how Oasis platform can really help. As we just discussed, the Oasis platform can actually help users to, using their financial and other behavioral information and so on, to really create much better credit score and risk score, and also doing all this in a privacy-preserving way, where users are still maintaining control of their data. So then in this way, it can really help DeFi to grow bigger, to get to more of the mainstream by actually offering a broader user population with this under-collateralized loans, for example. And that's one example. Another example another direction I'm really excited about is actually further growing DeFi in new ways. So for example, again, today's DeFi mainly just deal with these traditional financial assets. But with what I just talked about, we have the Oasis platform enables this completely new type of assets, which is data assets. So when you combine data assets and decentralized finance and DeFi, essentially it suddenly opens up a completely new domain that I think nobody has really thought much about, because nobody has really done anything about it. I think it's really brand new. So by combining DeFi and data assets essentially can become a new primitive in DeFi. So on one hand, this data assets can help enhance existing DeFi capabilities, like what we just mentioned, the under-collateralization. But also, I'm really excited to see there can be new products, new financial products, new services that's by combining DeFi and this new type of data assets, that we can have even new types of assets being created and new values being created and completely new financial mechanisms being created as well. And also, I hope that this, in the end, is not just about people making more money and so on. And I really do hope that it can actually lead to better ways to create more societal benefits. So, for example, by actually, so with the data assets, one can, so for example, just like liquidity mining, users can do liquidity staking and so on. Again, there you have to have money in order to participate. But with the data asset, everybody has data and everybody can have their data assets. And somebody's data assets, even though the person may not have a lot of money, but their data assets actually could be very valuable. So for example, for someone who has a rare medical condition, that their medical data could be much more valuable than somebody else who has a lot more money. Right? So this actually is a very interesting democratization and even playing grounds for users. And then now with these data assets, users can stake, just like doing liquidity staking, they can do data staking. So they can stake their data into these pools that we call data trusts. And consumers could then utilize the data in this data trust and also provide some payment and so on, and users can get data yield. And also we hope that we can create lots and lots of these type of data trusts that can also lead to societal benefits. For example, given that users can still maintain control of their data even when their data is being staked in these data trusts. So then we hope that more users will be more open to participate, and then we can imagine having this data trust with lots of users, for example, medical data or other types of data that can help medical researchers to more easily gain access to medical data to help them to do their medical research and help develop better cures for diseases and so on.
That's really interesting. So like putting on my investor hat, just to mirror that back to you, I think there are two things that jump out that are really, really interesting and all the, kind of that get unlocked here. Back to this idea of like when you can do a brand new thing that you just couldn't do before, that's where really innovative startups are born. So the first thing that kind of caught my ear as an investor is this idea that you could take data as a new form of an asset and actually start to stake it or do liquidity mining with it and bootstrap, a new asset class basically, which is something that everybody has. But I think it's pretty fascinating, the ability to sort of use your data as an asset, or you could use it for collateral, you could liquidity mine with it and so on. It's pretty fascinating. And yeah, we haven't really seen anybody do that yet, even though Facebook and Google essentially mine your data and they make $100 to $200 billion a year. So like clearly in aggregate data is quite valuable. If you figure there are about 2 billion people on the internet, that means your data stream just at Facebook and Google is worth $100 a year, which is actually is a sizable amount of money for a lot of people. And it's most valuable. I think this is the second interesting insight, kind of from an investor perspective, that I'll have to think about a little bit. Is it's in many ways the asset is the most valuable to the people who have the least money today. Which is like if you're a millionaire, $100 may not mean a lot. But if you're in the developing world, $100 is a lot of money. And so it actually turns on its head the idea of what a lot of finance or DeFi is doing, which is it's the most valuable for people who have excess assets. And in a lot of ways, data is the most valuable to people who have the least amount of existing assets, which is kind of a novel thing, which sniffs to me like there are going to be some really interesting startups created kind of on that primitive, like you were saying, because I think it sort of unlocks a different kind of user and allows you to do things that you couldn't do before. So that's really interesting. Something I'll have to keep an eye on as, as somebody that invests in startups.
Yeah, thanks. And also that's why I'm really excited too. Like with the Oasis platform, I think that's why it's really uniquely, appealing and exciting to a lot of developers because of this type of new capabilities and new opportunities that it offers to developers. And also another thing, going back to a little bit to what you just mentioned, I think another direction that I'm really excited about, that essentially moving this data trust one step further, is that, so one point you just made is, right, so like Facebook, Google, in aggregate, by taking users' data, they create like huge value. But if you distribute that to individuals, each individual may not get a lot of money, like maybe it's a few $100 a year and so on. Yes, like for people who don't have much money, that actually is meaningful. It can be very meaningful. And another thing is that I'm actually hoping that by creating this data trust and also if you expand it further, it can be this data DAO, right? It's essentially what it allows is, so today, if you look at these aggregators, so basically there are these aggregators, Google and Facebook, they aggregate users' data, and then they basically essentially try to gain benefits on the organizations themselves. So they are separate from users and they do not represent the best interests of users. But if we can create these data trusts and data DAO that actually represents users' best interests, now suddenly you have this new entity, which is a different type of aggregator, that because it aggregates potentially lots and lots of users' data and so on, it can be very valuable. It can have a lot of power, even more power than each individual maintaining control of their data. And hence, this data DAO, they can actually act on behalf of the user, and they can have more negotiation power on behalf of the user. So for example, one domain we haven't spent a lot of time looking into, but I also think it could be a really exciting area to look into is, so for example, people talk about health insurance. In general, it's very difficult for individuals. If you are like self-employed and so on, you don't have very good options for your health insurance because you are individual. And similarly, we see a lot of these kind of examples. Just as individuals, it's difficult. Like it's not like you are part of a big company, and then you can have better, deals and negotiation power and so on. But this type of data DAO, it can actually aggregate users' data, aggregate users' interests, and then they can negotiate on behalf of the users. So essentially, they actually, then in this case, this data trust or data DAO itself in aggregate can have a lot of value. And this value may not need to be distributed individual to each individual user, that just like $100 a year or something. But when it's in aggregate, it has a lot of value, and it can provide, for example, better negotiation for better insurance premium, or it can offer better as an insurance term for individuals. So together, individuals help each other, but in this case, because it's helping users, the best interest, then it actually can essentially, I would say it's a new type of player that has not existed before, that potentially can be as powerful as some of the current incumbents, but actually in this case, acting on the best interests of users.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The idea of a data DAO is also, it's interesting because kind of back to this idea of aggregating data and making it valuable. And today, what might be a liability sort of getting turned on its head and becoming an asset. I was imagining things like, you could take everybody that has some rare condition, and it might be a liability. They might need some sort of drug, right? And so, from an insurer's perspective today, it's considered a liability. But actually, if you could get all of the people in the world who have that condition in one place, and now you can analyze their genomes, and now some pharmaceutical company can make a lot of money off of it because they have everybody's genome in one place, and they can start to understand it and build therapies for it. All of a sudden, the aggregate collection of those people actually has a lot of value. Rather than being a liability, it becomes an asset to have all that data in one place, such that actually an insurance company or a pharmaceutical company might want to pay for access to that data. So that's pretty fascinating. I think those kinds of insights where things used to be liabilities and they become assets are potentially really powerful, unlocks for value and potentially for businesses as well. That's pretty fascinating.
And I think I do actually really strongly believe that this is the future, the future direction, especially actually as the world moves more into the digital world, and as AI becomes more and more powerful. I think we need to have better ways to help users maintain control of their data and so on. But on the other hand, also these technologies become more readily available, and I think the combination of these technology advancements and so on will make the data DAO more and more feasible. And I think just given essentially the development of technology, I think in the end, as this becomes more and more feasible, and because it aligns better and better with users' interests, and users will demand something more like that, and because it's becoming more and more feasible, then I think this direction, I certainly believe that actually I will win in the
Yeah, there's a really nice feedback loop there. It is the right architecture to handle sort of this new asset class. And as more and more people come in to take advantage of the ability that you can actually make money off of the data, then it brings more people in. So there's actually a really nice feedback loop there. And it does become, if you can get it going fast enough, it does become sort of the standard way that entire new classes of software should be built. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. It's a really fun conversation. I think we had a lot of really exciting discussions and so on.
Yeah, it was great. It was great to see you, Don. Pleasure. I learned a bunch, as I always do. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot.